Disney cartoons were actually in the public domain, would Thunderbeam Animation be in the gold mine right now?
It'd be awesome, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But this is the whole thing. Is like at some point they will be. Material that didn't exist in any other way has still been thrown out.
Aww.
So it's a weird. Archival work is really weird because I feel like we're at this odd point where the next generation isn't going to care quite as much. You guys will.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think it's going to be even harder to try to justify doing projects, especially with more obscure things that a lot of places own.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest crimes that anyone can commit in terms of art is not chronicling, and I'm not trying to say like, oh, chronicling the old stuff or anything, but more so chronicling things that shaped up people to where they are nowadays. Like a lot of people who have made, like even like Pixar movies are heavily inspired by Disney movies of the past even, and a lot of animated shows that I see nowadays are like heavily inspired by classic cartoons and not just Cuphead.
Oh yeah, it's funny because if you think about who the most influential animation artists are now, you have to include in there a lot of early 30s people like Seymour Keitel would be like in the list, and of course Mary Blair and really John Hubley and a lot of the UPA folks.
Yeah, they're definitely. I wouldn't consider them unsung heroes because we do kind of sing their praises a lot, but they're definitely not as known as say Disney or Fleischers or Hanna-Barbera or something.
As a giant company, Disney wouldn't have a problem actually releasing a lot of the more obscure things that they've made, and they did some of that in DVD releases. But quite honestly, everything should have just been out.
Yeah, because they know that fans don't seem to like them. But the thing is that these obscure films, they actually experiment, like some of the 2000s films.
Right.
They could be a company that could make everything in their animation catalog accessible easily.
Easily.
Yep.
It wouldn't really hurt them. I mean, they have the bucks to do it.
Right, but they don't know. It's not that they don't know where to spend it, or maybe that's the case. It's more so that they're just. It's that sad reality of the corporate film business where they're just too afraid to take a risk.
Yeah, and part of it is the board of directors not wanting money to go to certain places. All of Disney's nitrate is at the Library of Congress now in DC, and they have a few people there working. Disney hires a few people to work there to continually go through the nitrate and look for damage.
Oh, great!
And so they start at the beginning of the library. They go all the way through everything, and when they're all the way through, they start over again. It's kind of a boring job. I was there with Dave Gerstein actually, and we pulled the neg on Snow White, and just one of the reels. And the funny thing, he wanted to see if there was a shot in the camera neg that had been altered or changed, because there's a shot during the snoring scene that's different, and thought it might be different than original release, and didn't appear that way. It was the same stock. It was the same stock date. So
interesting that you bring up Snow White. I own the Illusion of Life book by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. Great book in its own right, but there's some pages. I think mostly when they're talking about the story process of Snow White, and you see images from the movie, and like the book came out in the 80s when the movie like wasn't. I don't even think the film had been restored for anything yet. So like they showed the film's original color palettes, which were more like monotone and kind of toned down, and then a lot of the newer releases are more saturated.
You see them really goosed. It looks like they pulled stills from a 70s IB Tech print.
Because I have a funny story to tell.
Tell it, dude.
I listened to this podcast called Animated Anarchy with Michael Rocco and Andrew Dickman, and there was an episode about Sword the Stone, and Mike Rocco actually spoke to a film restoration person who used to work at Disney, and he asked him.
I saw one of the Blu-ray Disney releases, and I'm like, "What'd you guys?" It was Sleeping Beauty. I said, "What did you guys do? Like, why are the fairies look like they're made out of like caramel apples. They just look like bright candy colors. That's not the colors they use. Like, oh, we referenced the cells. And I'm like, you're an idiot. You never reference the cells. And they were like, why? It's like, because the thing about a cell and about how photography was done back then is that something that you see under a camera, especially at like 3-strip Technicolor, which was a very volatile process at the time, to get one color on the screen, you had to paint a completely different color. That's why they had a color system. So like in the case of like Dalmatians, if you painted those Dalmatians white on the cells, they would shine like glowing they would glow under the camera because they were too bright and the light would reflect on them and cause a blur. So they had to paint them gray.
It came down to, honestly, just a couple of people over there that were in restoration, and I'm not going to mention their names, but there's one person who was running things for years who isn't anymore, and he would scrub those films to death. So the mandate, there was another guy named Scott McQueen that was head of the archival work, and he was the opposite end of this guy that was in charge of restoration for years. He liked to do everything old school. So Disney's restorations for years were all photochemical restorations. So which meant that the whole process they kept on film, even though we were at a point like where labs weren't doing that anymore. Now labs had started to do laser graphic scans and you clean up the film that way. But he would do sort of straight restorations without any digital cleanup. One way I think that's really cool because now they have preservation negs exactly like the original material looked like. But in another way, he could have made, in theory, he could have made beautiful, not really altered versions of the films, well, with a lot of the dust and dirt just cleaned up. And that would have been a smarter route. I like Warner's approach better in that they kind of leave the film looking like film.
Right.
You don't know how far to go,
Yeah, you can't go too far.